My oldest brother, she has 3 sons, would have liked to have moved her to New Orleans, closer to his business, so that he could look over with her. And in my case, I knew that my mom wanted to stay in Pensacola, so I, said she needs to stay in her home. This started kind of a disagreement between 2 brothers. Unfortunately, this disagreement escalated, and my oldest brother did go to an attorney after getting a trust manager of my mother's trust to recommend he go to an attorney to get guardianship of my mother. And what happened was, she went to court. She had her advance directives in order. She testified in court. She actually went to the West Florida Memory Clinic 2 days before court, and the neurologist said that Ms. Franks had the capacity to make the decision of who her guardian would be. And with all that given, the judge still said, I just don't think it's best. And it's not best because there's a tug-of-war between the children, and the trust manager also believes it's the best. What the judge didn't know was the first article of the trust, the design of the trust was to keep it out of guardianship. And so the trust manager, I believe, reneged on his fiduciary duty to look after my mom, or as part of the group to hand her over to a third-party guardian.
My mother had only 2 sons, myself and my younger brother. My younger brother has been addicted to drugs since the age of 14. And he was financially exploiting my mother, and that's the reason why I took my mother, or tried to get my mother under my care as her guardian. My plan was to become my mother's guardian, remove the brother from the house, and give my mother the care that she was in need of. I had no idea that there was a potential for somebody else to become my mother's guardian. My attorney didn't advise me of that pitfall. When the judge looked at me and said, I don't want to appoint you as your mother's guardian because there's too much animosity between you and your brother, how do you feel about a professional guardian? And I said, well, if you could stop the stealing that's going on in the house, I would be open to it. I live 100 miles away from my mother, and it would save me the drive back and forth to visit her once a week. So I thought it sounded like a very benign and good thing at the time. She gave me a choice of 2 guardians. Both were religious organizations, and one was sort of in line with my religion. I turned over all of the cash that I held jointly in my mother's name, which was $115,000, and the safety deposit box that she had in both our names. They went through all her cash and stocks in about 2.5 years. They went through her money by hiring a round-the-clock nursing service to be there 24/7. And my brother continued living in the house. He didn't help out. My mother was still able to bathe, clothe, and feed herself. So they went through all her cash in 2.5 years. I don't think my brother, with all his bad habits, could have taken what the guardianship did in 5.5 years. It was a mistake.
I had provided absolutely wonderful care for my mother. She ate, and of course, I'm not trying to be a commercial for anybody, but cage-free eggs, non-antibiotic meats, garden fresh vegetables, flaxseed. I fed her just the best. Her home was sparklingly clean. I made sure she had pedicures and manicures at all times so that she'd be presentable. I wanted to make sure that every day of her life she had dignity. But in the meantime, my sister was just not receiving information. And once that petition was filed, I feel like my mother was railroaded into a court-appointed guardian conservatorship. She had no due process. You will hear this over and over again from other people. The guardian ad litem that is appointed and the court visitor that is appointed lied in their reports to the court. My mother's hearing lasted all of 2 or 3 minutes. And the next thing you know, complete strangers have taken over my mother's life. People who don't even know where the pain from her arthritis is. People who need to be paid for their services.
The common thread that runs through all of these stories of abusive guardianship is family dysfunction. Always, it's the story of one aspect of a family wanting one thing and another faction of the family wanting another. And when those dysfunctions blow up, become hypercritical, and suddenly someone hires an attorney, that's when this all starts. It is all related to the desire for control, power, and primarily money, at the expense of the well-being of families and, of course, the well-being of the elderly person who's taken into this abysmal situation where they lose their rights and become a living dead.
On August 24th, 2010, my mother's life forever changed. She went from a free person just making all her own decisions to being a prisoner. My mother, she did not receive due process. She never received the notice. I looked all over her house. I asked her. She only had mild dementia. She knew what she was doing. The only thing she needed help was with her finances. She also, when the examining committee came, they came unannounced. They were supposed to come when I was there. The one doctor that came, the last one, he never examined my mother, but yet he deemed her incapacitated and was paid out of my mother's funds. My mom, she really didn't believe this was happening. She didn't want to believe that my sister was the one that petitioned the court. My sister actually hired the attorney with my mother's money. My sister didn't pay for anything. Everything was based on lies. Nothing was truth. My mother always planned on living with me when the time came, and that's what she wanted to do. But yet she was taken under guardianship, plenary guardianship, which she never should have been. There should have been no guardianship, but at least not plenary, because she had all her capacities, she just needed help with finances. After they did that to her, everything changed. I really believe that they wanted to sell her house right away. She had enough money to live. She had my father's pension to live quite nicely. My mother was Baker acted. I don't understand why. I really think it was just to get her out of the house, because right after that, they put her house up for sale. I asked the guardian if my mother could live with me. I kept asking her that. She said no, she needs to be in a place with other people like herself. Finally, the guardian saw what my sister was all about. So she said my mom could go live with me if I went to Georgia. My husband and I had a house in Georgia. We were going to go there in about 3 years when he could retire. We did not plan to go there before that because we were both working. But to get my mom out of the situation, I agreed to do that. So finally we were able to go to Georgia, but what was really strange, I thought, was we had to wait till my mother's house was sold. So she was in a facility. First it was rehab, and then she went to a regular nursing home because the guardian wanted to move her far away, and my mother didn't want to be there. Anyway, so she let her stay there. My mom finally got to leave the end of June of 2011, And we went to Georgia and everything was going good, but it was taking very long to transfer the guardianship. My sister would talk to my mom. She finally convinced my mom with her mild dementia that if my mom would go back to Florida, she could have her house back, her dog, because everything was taken away from her, and she loved that little dog. She could have everything back. So my mom, I had to take her back. In the meantime, my sister created another petition so my mom could not go back to Georgia. The judge decided not to let her go back. So I've been working ever since then, 2012, to try to get my mother back with us. My mother, she's so upset because she wants to leave the facility. She's a prisoner. She's not allowed to go anywhere. She never leaves the facility. She hasn't left the facility in 3 years except for trips to the hospital. I try to keep her up and tell her that we're working on it. We're trying to get everything done, trying to get her out of there. But she's so sad. It's just awful. Nobody really knows what it's like unless they've lived it. My mom is given Xanax at 8 in the morning, 12 noon, and 5 p.m. And also I discovered that they're giving her Ambien at 5 p.m., which is not supposed to be done. I looked it up. It said Ambien and Xanax can actually stop a person's heart from beating and their lungs from breathing. I asked them not to do it at the facility. It even says on the medication that it's supposed to be given to her at 8 p.m., not 5. And they say, oh, well, just do it now, it's easier. I can't get through to anyone. My mother has been in the hospital because of aspiration and other things, and I think all of it is due to not being alert, and she's not alert because she's given Xanax all day long.
So the question is, how does this work? You know, if you take that 40-hour internet course and you pass that test that a 5th grader could pass, and you are now a certified guardian, the first thing you're told is, go out and find wards. And, as I've mentioned in many of my talks, in 2003, there were 23 professional guardians in the state of Florida. Today, there are 560. That's the Willie Sutton rule. Why did Willie Sutton rob banks? Because that's where the money is. The ranks of professional guardians have grown exponentially because of the amount of money they make, and there's a lot of money to be made. Now, how does a guardian do that? Well, the first thing you have to do is pass this test. You don't need a license. Every other professional, from barbers to plumbers to doctors, we have a license. I have to have a license to do my work. Not a guardian. All they need to do is pass this 40-hour junior college internet-based examination, which is mind-boggling. And the test that comes with it, and pay a few bucks, and you are now a certified guardian who could handle multi-billion-dollar estates with no training, no education, no experience, no license, nothing. That's nuts. But it's reality. So, where would a guardian, a brand new minted guardian, go to find wards? Well, you'd go where old people are. Hospitals, assisted living facilities, nursing homes, senior centers, you name it. Doctors' offices. And you develop a network of people to help identify who they are. You sponsor free educational planning seminars where you con elderly folks into revealing where every cent they have is located. And it's just a waiting game, because the elderly will fall and break their hip. They will get pneumonia, they will have strokes, they will have heart attacks, they will be in facilities, and when they're at their weakest, and you know who they are, and you've already identified the ones with family conflicts, it's so easy.
Currently, I'm allowed to talk to my mom for about 15 minutes a day, between 4 and 6. That's it. And it's recorded. It's monitored. And I can be cut off at any time. When we go see our mom, because of the stipulated order, and I'll describe what a stipulated order is. Stipulated order is when both sides agree. Mr. Franks, if you want to see your mother, you have to do these 10 things. Well, I don't like number 7, and I don't like number 9. Okay, Mr. Franks, you cannot see your mother. When you decide you like all 10, you can then see her. So it's a order that's agreed on under duress. You know, if I don't agree to this, I can't see my mom. My mother also states all the time, boys, why can't you spend the night? I got 4 rooms. I think this is still my house. We all know this story and how it ends. You know, the isolate, medicate, and steal the estate. That's the common theme. And in my mom's case, the medicate is now happening now. The isolation started, the stealing of the estate. My mom spends $1,000 a day to stay in her home. My mom can get up, she can use the restroom, she can do anything she needs to do with a little bit of assistance. She was actually doing quite well. She was actually on a cane at one time, and you know, before the guardianship took place, and then it went to a walker. Soon it will be on a wheelchair. She kind of sits all day in a chair watching TV. That didn't happen before. She was active. She didn't even watch TV.
My mother now, I'm aware that she is on antidepressants, I believe it is. I don't know if she's on any other kind of drugs. But she's really gone downhill in the last 6 months, rapidly. I mean, last summer I was down here with her, and I had her at the pool, and we were swimming laps. And she's in her 90s, and now she can't even walk. They keep her in a wheelchair all day. So she's really gone downhill fast. I believe my mother's suffering from depression. I know my father's suffering from depression. And they're scared. They're both scared.
After getting a court order saying I was not even permitted to see my mother, they put her in a welfare nursing home. They had her on Medicaid, even though she had more than $800,000 in the bank. They then said that she could no longer swallow. They put her on a feeding tube. And then they crushed up morphine sulfate. And she died instantly. It's a time-release drug. You can't crush up morphine sulfate and put it in a feeding tube. It causes instant death.
The attorney told me that I should, to protect my parents, I needed to get a guardian. He said that guardian would help you. We need to start with your mom because she has Alzheimer's, and at that time she was having, she had bed sores. She was 24-hour care, but she was being fed drugs and alcohol and tied to chairs and very, very abused. And so the attorney said, you know, we can. That's what you have to do. You need to get a guardian to help you, to help your parents. And he said, I represent guardians, and we'll appoint a guardian as an emergency, a temporary emergency guardian to come in. And so it was a very quick process. And even the thing of it is that the council of 3 people that come in to decide if your mother is incompetent, they even saw that my mother she had bed sores everywhere. You would think that they would say there's something wrong here, or how come your mother has 24-hour care but she has bed sores and she can't even speak because she's so drugged. After that, the temporary guardian joined forces with the neighbor, and then I was just like, nobody believes you. We think you're the person with the problem. And my father never made it to court. He died about a week before. I kept thinking, well, if I could just get him to court, they'll see what's wrong. They'll know. They'll help him. But he never made it.
Doctors have a role in this, And I'm not proud of my brethren in medicine who willy-nilly prescribe these horrible drugs that turns a pretty normal 80-year-old into a drooling zombie in 48 hours. And I'll tell you, it's a little off topic, but there's another industry in guardianship, again with my brothers in medicine, and that is the feeding tube industry. As more and more elderly people are being kept alive, and let's remember, as long as the ward is above ground, that's a billing opportunity. In order to keep them alive while they're drooling vegetables who don't want to eat, the system employs doctors who jam tubes into the stomach to keep the ward alive, if you call that living.
The world needs to know this. Everybody except me, because I did not use the word lie. I said misrepresented, because I'm scared. But lie. Okay, so just like you said, you think you can go to court and say, I can prove that this was incorrect information or this was misrepresented. If myself and 10 other people filed a complaint against the guardian ad litem for their misrepresentations or against the visitor, guess what, everybody? It is denied because they have absolute quasi-judicial immunity. So they are free to say anything incorrect or misrepresenting the case that they want, because there are no ramifications for what they do.
And if they fail to provide any documentation that you are trying to get, any court records, and they don't provide it, they are not in contempt of court.
Right.
You would
You
be, and they don't get a bench warrant. You would.
Correct.
So it's double standards.
So it's important to know, and it's important to be educated right here and now, that no matter what they do, they are safe. Therefore, if you're not a court official, if you are disabled or graying or becoming elderly American, you are not safe. So they are safe, you are not safe.
And by speaking out for our parents and elders, we are actually doing more than protecting them. We are protecting ourselves and the next generation, which is why it's so critically important for the people viewing this video right now to understand this is bizarro world, but it's reality.
Yes.
It's happened to us. We're smart people. We're people of means. We're intellectual. We're educated. If it happens to us, it can just as easily happen to you.
My mother, who at the time was 78 years old, fell in love with a convicted felon that was 50 years old. This all came about by her visiting her customary car wash, where she was well dressed with jewelry, a nice car, Mercedes-Benz, the latest model, so on and so forth. Over there, she usually was a very flirtatious woman, like all the men fall in love with her, they think she's beautiful and all these things. It was obviously a setup. This man she had never seen in the car wash, all of a sudden this man appears and approaches her and tells her how beautiful she is, that the minute he saw her, he fell in love with her beauty, her youth, her everything, 78 years old. So this is where their affair really started. So she didn't tell me anything, but she was keeping dates with me. Like if I would invite her to dinner or lunch, she would say, no, I cannot go, I have something to do. I said, well, this is weird because I'm the one who drives her around. So it came the time that she told me, she says, oh, I have someone that I'm seeing that is very much interested in me. And every time the conversation went on, and there were a lot of details in it, she would say a different age, until one day I decided to sit down at the computer and research the name. Little did I know that the man was a convicted felon, and facing jail time at the time that he had met my mother. He was facing 17 years in jail for armed robbery. When I confronted my mother with a picture, which I pull out of the internet, of course, she said, yes, that is him. Oh, he's so adorable and he's so sweet, he's so nice. I said, Mom, sit down. Let me talk to you. Let me explain to you where this is coming from. And she says, no, what you want is my own happiness. You don't want to see me happy. This man makes me very happy. So the whole relationship kept on going until he started asking for the money. She would call me and she would say, where is the money? I said, well, the money is invested. I cannot get it for you right now. There's money in the bank, but I don't think that you should get it. There was a lot of money in the bank. At the time, there were about $500,000 cash. And I could hear him in the background saying in Spanish, tell her to bring $1 million in a suitcase this afternoon, cash. This went on, and the pressure went on, and the pressure increased until I found myself in the position of consulting an attorney who also recommended that I file for a protective guardianship. That's where the big mistake was. This was the nightmare of my life, the most painful times, and the things that I have endured all these years. This guardianship has been going on for 9 years. The first day that we went to court, I went with my attorneys. The judge would not allow my attorney to speak, let alone the attorney I knew. She had been in my house at dinner parties at one given time and point previously. So I thought she was going to excuse herself from the case. Little did I know that since she knew what was behind it, she was going to stick to the case. That same day, the very first hearing, my mother shows up in court with the boyfriend and an attorney that he has gotten for her or recommended her, not because he was paying for it, of course. The attorney in question happened to be a friend of the judge who had briefed the judge on the case previously before we entered the courtroom. I don't know whether it was that same day or 2 days earlier or whatever, but it was very obvious the judge knew already the case. My attorneys were not allowed to speak. I was not allowed to speak. And everything was done right there. Basically, we walked out of the courtroom like, we cannot understand why we're not allowed to defend ourselves, because the story she was hearing was a bunch of lies from this other attorney that fabricated the case against me. A few days later, a week later, 2 weeks later, we are called in again for another hearing. The judge sends my mother to have her evaluated by a panel of 3 psychiatrists. Not the 3 agreed that my mother was not competent at the beginning. But nevertheless, the judge said incompetent to handle the property, the assets, the money. The person could do whatever they want except the property. The money is all they were interested in. And at that same time, the judge appoints the attorney that came with my mother, recommended by the convicted felon, as her guardian. And this is where the nightmare starts.
We have federal laws that guarantee our due process, our civil rights. But when we go to the federal government, we are uniformly rebuffed. We are told that guardianship is strictly a state matter, and that the federal government simply will not become involved in guardianship matters. In fact, very few people really know that there's something called the probate exclusion, which means that the federal government and the Department of Justice are prohibited from interfering with anything to do with probate. It's a very interesting law. Nobody really knows where it came from or why it's still on the books, but it's a state matter. When we go to our state officials and try to complain about guardianship abuse, we are told it's not a criminal matter, it's a civil justice issue. And so all of the victims of this abysmal abuse and their families are relegated with no power to do anything about guardianship. As has been said in the legislature, there's no complaint department, at least not yet. We're hopeful that next year in session we will be able to change the laws that currently force people who have complaints about guardians to complain to the Department of Children and Families, which frankly has a very bad record of doing that and is not an organization that is very effective. We hope to change that and redirect that to one particular organization called the Department of Elder Affairs with a new leadership and the ability to intake cases, investigate them, and prosecute them. But for right now, our government has abandoned us and left us to the hands of greedy, greedy lawyers and guardians and the judges who supervise them. It seems to me that the one thing our government has a promise to us, to give us, is our constitutional rights. The entire foundation of our society in the United States of America is based on a principle. And it's in the very beginning of the Constitution, it's in the Florida State Constitution, and that is no one can be discriminated against on the basis of really anything. Do you feel like that works for these folks?
My mom, who is a ward of the state, she can't believe it's happening to her. She said, "This is America. This can't be happening." She doesn't understand it, and when I try to explain it, she gets so upset and shocked by it. I have to change the subject. I'm afraid it's going to kill her. But she had her advance directives in place. She did everything right. She can't believe people could come into her home, take all her money, change the locks. She can't believe that they took her mail from her. She still checks her mail 2 years later, and it's very sad to see an 84-year-old woman walking down to her mailbox and see it empty. But that's what a lot of these people say, this is America, this can't be happening. And when we tell other people what has happened, they find it hard to believe. And they don't want to believe it, because if they believed it, it means it could happen to them.
Again, the judge asked her, how long will she stay here? And she said, not for a long time. Everybody, she told, even in the interview with the doctor, she wanted to be in Venezuela and be buried next to my father. That was her wishes. So we came back to Miami, and we had a settlement agreement where they would not order her to have a complete plenary guardianship, but instead the attorney for the court, against the law, was asking for my mother to have plenary guardianship so they could go for more money. So my mother, meanwhile, all the money was frozen. The judge did not give my mother 1 cent. My mother didn't have money for her daily living, for her doctors, for her medication. That's the way they kept her with the guardianship that you ask, what was the guardianship for if they were not taking care of her? It was just litigation and just making money for the attorneys. So my mother's visa expired, and my mother became an illegal alien. She was asking the guardian, please let me go to Venezuela, and they would not let her go. The reason, if they would let her go, then they cannot say that she had a guardianship. My mother already at that time was 97 years old. She was very independent. Every day she would go to the mall, and she would be walking, and she would be independent in all aspects of life. But she was already 97, and she was very fragile, and we were concerned that she would fall. I asked her attorney, please give her some money, because at that point I couldn't afford already to pay for her 24-hour care. Please release some money so she can have somebody to take care of her 24 hours. But they would not release any money. So
it happened that my mother fell down and she broke her hip. When that happened, I took my mother. I didn't call the ambulance. I didn't call 911. I carried my mother and took her to the University of Miami hospital, where I knew what doctors were the best doctors that could do the surgery for my mother in case she needed surgery for her hip. So we went to the university. We went to the doctors, and when we got there, the guardians and the attorney for the guardians and none of the attorneys would answer the phone for the hospital. They didn't care. And my mother, because of protocol at the hospital, she got admitted as an indigent. As an indigent, you cannot choose the doctors. That I brought my mother all the way there, especially for the doctors I wanted, and they couldn't give it to me because she didn't have health insurance or she didn't have Medicare. So another doctor was the one who took care of her, and there was a problem. The doctor made a mistake. My mother had surgery, and my mother passed away on February 17, 2013. It has been 2 years.
In the beginning, the judge says my mother had to be reviewed by 3 people, and one of whom was a doctor, psychiatrist, who was not fully competent, if you ask me, and 2 other people. And after I spoke to one of them, a social worker, she says that your mom did well, she's fine. She agreed with me. She was fully capacitated. But when the time came to speak to the judge, evidently all 3 people had to be on the same page. And whatever the doctor said went. To tell you the truth, I found out later that the only way that these people get paid is by saying that the persons that they interviewed was incompetent. So that's why so many people are declared incapacitated. It suits their self-interest.
I'm close to my parents. I help them out a lot. And when I was at work, I got a phone call that my mother had had a stroke. So I immediately made plans to come down and stay with them. When I was staying at the house with my father while my mother was in the hospital recouping, she had come home and she wasn't doing very well. My sister hired some nurses to come in and spend the night with her. Didn't work out very well. I caught the nurses sleeping when I got up in the middle of the night. It kind of spiraled out of control from there. My one sister, who's a nurse, was called over the next morning. They all made a big issue out of it. They called DCF on me, and I don't know what they thought I had done. I caught the nurse sleeping, so anyway, to make the long story a little bit shorter, we took my mother back to the hospital, and that evening I was sitting at the dining room table having hot chocolate and cookies with my father. The police came, made me leave the house, the premises, and took my father away that night. Now he owns his own home, paid for. We were sitting there visiting quietly, just the 2 of us and our dogs, and they came and made me leave my 90-something-year-old father by himself with strangers. It was appalling. It was heartbreaking. And I really don't remember much after that. I had power of attorney, for my mother and my father. I didn't think this would have that big of an effect on me. They trusted me with everything they had, and I was, like I said, I was their power of attorney. I was ordered to leave that night. The police didn't want to hear it. The person that was sent there to stay with my father didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to hear anything I had to say. They ordered me to leave. So I had my dog with me. I took my dog. And I left. And after that, the whole situation was so stressful that I had a brain aneurysm and I almost died. And they proceeded with the court hearings and everything while I was in the hospital. My daughter came to stay with me. They still didn't know whether I was going to live or not. And they went to court and got a guardian in place for my parents. My parents never went back home to their house, which they owned free and clear. And the guardian took over, and they now have a guardian in place, which is costing us a lot of money. They've almost gone through all my mother and father's assets.
I was with her the night that they came to my father's house on a quiet summer evening, a Friday evening. I witnessed them taking my father from the house. A police escort was with them. Prior to that, they asked us to vacate the property, which Joan and I agreed to do under the threat of being arrested. In retrospect, I made the wrong choice, but I did leave the house. When I turned around, I witnessed 4 people running from a vehicle into the house, started to change the locks. I went back to my house, which is 4 doors down, my sister and I. My cell phone rang. It was my father crying, asking me to call the police. I said that they were involved and there was nothing I could do. He said, "Mary, they're changing the locks and they're ransacking my house." This must have gone on for 2 hours, and then I got a phone call from the so-called ETG, Emergency Temporary Guardian, asking me where certain precious items were in the house. I guess my dad had disclosed items of jewelry. I told her to the best of my knowledge where I thought those items were. I hung up. My parents have a lovely home. I moved in with them on April 15th of 2013, 6 months prior to they took my father out. The best part of my day was coming home to them. They were both fully capacitated, although in their mid-90s. I played cards with my mom every evening. And sometimes my father would make dinner, and sometimes I would. We shared stories, talked about family, and that was my social life. And it all went away. And now my visitations to I finally did locate my parents, as I was allowed to meet my father on a street corner in downtown Lake Worth for 15 minutes. I was told not to bring up anything bad, not to discuss anything that happened, but I could only ask about their well-being. I still had no idea of where my father was living. The first thing my father asked me was, "Why haven't you contacted me? Why haven't you come to visit?" Therefore, I knew that the guardian did not even advise my parents that I didn't know where they were, contributing more to their loneliness and abuse. It's a horrible experience. So after those 15 minutes, then another week went by, and then I finally found out where they were, but I was still restricted to visit them. As I was being accused of starving them, abusing them verbally, physically. I was accused by my siblings who had written numerous complaints to the Department of Children and Families and Adult Protective Services. And the guardian, of course, got free reign on my parents and took them out of their home just based on those accusations. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Consequently to that, my neighbors started inquiring where my parents were, because one neighbor or another would always visit my parents between 5 and 6 p.m. when they sat on their front porch, waiting for me to come home. They started inquiring where my parents were. When I told them the story, they thought that I had gone insane. They don't just take people out of their house.
Picture this. It is late afternoon on September 18th, 2009, and my father, Al Katz, an 89-year-old Holocaust survivor, is being put into an emergency temporary guardianship without his knowledge at all. He didn't know it was going on. I didn't know it was going on. It was going on. It was occurring against the law because there was, under the law, supposed to be notice to the family. And I was not given notice. It was also the hours just before the Jewish New Year. And my father, being a Holocaust survivor, this was a very important time to him. So he is suddenly put into emergency temporary guardianship. He is in a nursing home in violation of his advance directives, and he is panic-stricken. He, at that point in time, is completely reliving the Holocaust through flashbacks of being abandoned, of being imprisoned, and of feeling a total loss of control and loss of dignity. I find out about the guardianship after it has already been consummated. And then I finally find out where my father is and am able to talk to him on a phone. And of course, he is saying, "Come get me, help me." I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana. He's in Bradenton, Florida, 1,200 miles apart from me. And I said, "Daddy, you know it's Rosh Hashanah. I can't leave right now, but I'm coming to get you." So he is in a state of total trauma, and I too am in a state of trauma worrying about him. After that, the guardians come in and they hire a locksmith, change the locks to Daddy's home, and completely strip it of all the valuables, the cash, and other kinds of records, documents that are important to my father. It was so bad that 6 years later, we still have never gotten the drawers properly on track because they had gone through every single drawer in the house, every one, and pulled them out to search for whatever they wanted. No record was made of what they took. There was no video made, and my father's life changed literally in an instant.
I'm an attorney. I've been practicing law in Florida for 40 plus years. I practice in the Tampa Bay area, and recently I've become involved with some of the aspects of guardianship law as it's practiced in Florida. And what I find is that, these laws were initially passed to protect the vulnerable, and those persons that now are using the practice, I find, are using it not as it was designed, but as and I call it a business model, because in the parlance of persons who are examining these cases, we see that it's what might be called as a business model. And I believe the way it's developed is that in most communities, you will find that among the lawyers who are practicing in that community, there are very few lawyers who practice guardianship law. The judges that are elected or are appointed, generally they come from different backgrounds. Probably about 50% of the persons who have been appointed to the bench come from the criminal side of the bar, meaning they were prosecutors, persons of that nature. The other side of it is you will find that other persons come from the civil side, or they'll have a general background and they aspire to be a judge, and most of them have not experienced the guardianship practice, because the guardianship practice, if you look in, say, the county where I am, there's maybe 100 lawyers there, and out of those lawyers, probably there's really only about 3 primary practitioners, and then they have these other associated lawyers that will accept appointments for the ward, participate in emergency temporary guardianships. And what we find where the biggest abuses are is with the concept of the emergency temporary guardian. To appoint an emergency temporary guardian, there has to be some exigent circumstance or some emergency reason why we're going to appoint an emergency temporary guardian. Now, an emergency temporary guardian, the process is very simple as the way it occurs. What occurs is a person who may not even know the proposed ward will sign a petition that has been drafted by an attorney who is in the guardianship business, okay? And these attorneys have contacts with hospitals, healthcare facilities, whatnot, and cases are referred to them for one reason or another. They then prepare a petition. They make allegations in the petition for an emergency temporary guardian. These allegations in many cases are not true or are aggrandized, and when the attorney goes before the judge, they do it on a very quick basis. In other words, the petition will be filed on a Wednesday for a hearing before the judge on a Friday. The attorney, petitioning attorney, will contact an attorney, will say, will you take this appointment? It's 2 days. The attorney has not seen the alleged incompetent. They show up. The testimony that is presented is generally unsworn testimony presented by the attorney who is bringing the action for the guardianship. And then at that point in time, an emergency temporary guardian is appointed. When that happens, number one, the ward is probably not even heard of this occurring. The ward or the proposed ward is probably home. Nobody's notified that person. And as soon as that emergency temporary guardian is appointed, the emergency temporary guardian goes to that person's bank. They substitute themselves for the proposed ward. They take over the ward's money. When the ward finally finds out that he is or she is subject to this process, he has no access to his money. He has no real ability to defend himself, and all of a sudden, and he's cut off from loved ones. The statutory scheme requires that when a petition is filed, that there are certain persons that are supposed to be notified. The persons next of kin are supposed to be notified. The ward is supposed to be noticed of the hearing so that the ward has an opportunity to, or the proposed ward has the opportunity to participate and defend themselves. This generally never occurs. It is rare that you see a ward or a proposed incapacitated person who is present at that initial proceeding. They're not there because they've not been notified. Your accuser makes hearsay statements against you. Many times they're not even placed under oath, and then you are adjudicated and incompetent at that moment. I have seen in certain areas where on average that process averages somewhere between 7 and 10 minutes, and you have been adjudicated and incompetent, okay? You don't have your money, you can't defend yourself, and you are then, the guardian has the opportunity to isolate you. Your guardian has the opportunity to place you into a facility. They can place you in a lockdown facility.
If the stories that you have seen in this video outrage you, make you mad as hell, do something about it. Talk about it with your family. Talk about it with your friends. Maybe with your co-worshipers at your place of worship, at your place of business. Put this issue on the map, on the radar, on the front page. Join an organization. Become active, because that's the only way that we can join together to make this horrible situation not happen to you.